Hey guys, tonight we slip into the cool, pearly mist rising over Lake Texcoco, where the water sits so still it seems to be thinking. You're perched on the edge of a canoe just before sunrise, knees wobbling a little because balance is not your strongest skill, and the lake absolutely knows this. The air smells faintly of wet reeds and sun-warmed clay that hasn't been warmed yet, and you can just make out the silhouettes of long, perfect rectangles floating in the distance. These are the Chinampas, Aztec floating gardens, and before this night is over, you'll discover that they are so neat, so organized, so mathematically satisfying that a modern engineer would blush. There's a reason the Aztecs fed hundreds of thousands of people from these islands, and there's also a reason you probably won't survive trying to build one yourself. Spoiler, it's the mud. So much mud. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, drop your location and local time in the comments, because I love seeing where everyone's listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You steady yourself as the canoe nudges forward, its wooden hull whispering against the lake's surface. The Chinampas emerge more clearly now, long, tidy strips rising only inches above the waterline, their edges so straight they look hand-drawn. You can see why the Aztecs were proud of them. Even this early in your journey, you sense the mix of engineering and ritual that kept them impeccable. A fisherman glides past, giving you a nod that seems to translate roughly to, "Don't fall in, outsider." You nod back like someone who absolutely will fall in. The first light of the sun slices through the mist, making the water blush gold, and suddenly the whole layout reveals itself. Canals forming a grid, Chinampas forming a pattern so orderly it could be mistaken for a chessboard. This isn't accidental. The Aztecs planned these artificial islands with remarkable precision, a historical fact most textbooks rush through, but here stretches before you in shimmering detail. You dip your fingers into the water. Cold, silty, alive with tiny organisms that once helped make the Chinampas so fertile. The lake might look peaceful, but beneath its calm surface lies a world of microscopic activity that the Aztecs skillfully harnessed. According to some fringe accounts, one's historians still argue whether to take seriously, certain farmers believed that the lake's spirits themselves stirred nutrients through the water at night, keeping the gardens nourished. One man's nutrient cycle is another man's benevolent mud ghost. You decide not to judge. A gentle breeze lifts the fog, revealing farmers already at work. They move with slow, deliberate choreography, their feet sinking slightly into the damp earth of the Chinampa. Each motion is careful, smoothing edges, checking boundary stakes, ensuring the narrow strips remain aligned. You notice there's almost no clutter, no random tools scattered, no piles of discarded plants. Everything has a place, and every place has been honored. You're still watching when a young worker waves to you, inviting you closer. His voice is soft but bright, the tone of someone who has been awake long enough to skip past grumpiness and reach quiet acceptance. "If you want to see how it stays neat," he says, "you start at sunrise. The lake shows you things at this hour." You're not entirely sure what that means, but you nod sagely, pretending you've known this all along. He gestures across the canal. "The mist is good," he explains. "It hides mistakes." You blink, unsure whether he's teasing you or telling a cosmic truth. The Aztecs were known for using humor with the same sharpness they used obsidian blades, so you assume both possibilities. As you drift beside him, he begins to describe how the earliest Chinampas came to be, humans carving order from the wetlands. They staked out rectangles and wove reeds to create fences, pulling in mud and compost to form raised beds. The first versions, he tells you, were humble, even messy, until experience shaped them into the elegant forms you see now. The precision wasn't merely aesthetic, it dictated water flow, root health, and crop yield. Straight edges meant predictable irrigation. Predictable irrigation meant food. Food meant survival. The breeze carries the sound of paddles slicing water, of distant market boats preparing for morning routes. A heron stalks along a Chinampa edge with the confidence of someone who absolutely owns this place. In the distance, a dog barks, because even in the 15th century, dogs were committed to unnecessary commentary. You pass a small shrine perched on a garden corner, decorated with flowers and a feather fan. To remind the gardens to behave, the young farmer jokes. But then his expression softens. Also to remind us. You get the sense that neatness here is part engineering, part devotion, part daily negotiation with nature. And maybe, just maybe, part competitive pride, because you catch another farmer side-eyeing your guide's Chinampa like he's judging the straightness of the rows. A canoe full of night shift workers paddles by, their eyes sleepy and hair mussed. One of them mutters something that sounds like, "At least it's not reed patch assignment." You make a mental note to ask about that later, but immediately forget because the sun hits the water just right, and suddenly everything glitters. Your guide points toward a cluster of Chinampas. The neatest gardens, he says, always start with the neatest minds. You consider your own desk back home and decide maybe the Aztecs would not have hired you. As the light strengthens, shadows stretch across the gardens, turning the whole landscape into a patchwork of gold and green. You feel the day beginning to breathe, the lake waking up. You're starting to understand why these gardens were famous, not just for feeding an empire, but for their quiet beauty, their perfectly maintained order, their insistence on balance. And as you let your canoe drift between two immaculately straight rows of willows, you realize the story has only just begun. You let the canoe ease forward, the water parting as gently as if it's agreeing to your presence, and your guide motions for you to hop onto one of the long, rectangular islands being shaped on the far edge of the Chinampa zone. You hesitate, because stepping from a wobbling canoe onto a half-built floating garden feels like the setup to a video titled, "I fell into an Aztec lake and regret everything." But the worker extends a hand, steady and patient, and soon you're standing on springy ground that gives just slightly beneath your weight. "This is the birth of a Chinampa," he explains, "and you're lucky. Not everyone gets to see one in its early, messy, mud-scented infancy. Most visitors only ever see the Instagram-ready version, straight lines, rich soil, lush crops. But here, at the edge of the wetlands, you're watching the careful geometry that makes those neat rows possible. Workers begin staking out the perimeter. You expect randomness or improvisation, but every step follows a deliberate grid. Long wooden poles, some stripped willow, some reeds bound tight, are driven into the lake bed at precise intervals. A mainstream historical fact, your guide mentions casually, is that Aztec surveyors used cords and measured paces to maintain spacing so exact it would impress a modern civil engineer. You nod, pretending you too could pace out a correct right angle without accidentally forming a trapezoid of shame. The workers lash horizontal reeds between the stakes, forming rectangular fences in the water. These woven walls act like giant, patient baskets, waiting to be filled. One man whistles a tune, another calls out measurements, and the whole team moves with a rhythm that feels rehearsed. You watch as mud is dredged from the canal bottom with long, flat shovels and piled inside the frame. The air thickens with the earthy scent of decomposing lake plants, and your guide grins. "That smell," he says. "That's the smell of future corn." A fringe tidbit drifts into the conversation as a woman hauling mud laughs and tells you that some farmers swear the lake mud is alive, that it remembers the shape it's meant to take. Historians still argue whether this belief was metaphor, superstition, or just a poetic excuse for why one crooked Chinampa line could haunt a farmer's reputation for months. Regardless, you decide not to upset the mud's feelings. You crouch to get a closer look. The workers alternate layers. Mud, reeds, more mud, cut grass, more mud. It's like watching someone build a lasagna out of swamp materials. Your guide taps the spongy mound with his foot. "The layering keeps it neat," he says. "It drains water evenly and stops the garden from sagging." You consider the number of times you've overwatered your houseplants back home and realize the Aztecs would have put you on canal cleaning duty forever. As the mound grows, workers smooth the top with boards, tamping it into a flat plane. They carve straight edges, shaping the earthen platform until it looks as though a giant has come through with an obsidian ruler. A boy, barely old enough to lift a shovel, hurries along the perimeter, scraping excess mud off the woven walls so the lines remain crisp. He works with the seriousness of someone guarding royal treasure. A canoe pulls alongside with bundles of dried reeds. The man at the front calls out, "Who asked for more pillows for the lake?" The workers groan at the joke, but it's affectionate groaning, the kind people reserve for bad puns that are unfortunately delivered daily. The reeds are layered across the top of the mud, forming a breathable compost blanket that helps everything settle. The Chinampa begins to take shape beneath your feet, still soft, still new, but undeniably becoming. Your guide gestures to the edges. "They have to be straight," he explains. "Crooked lines make crooked canals. Then boats crash. Then people blame each other, and suddenly we need a referee." He shrugs like this is a weekly occurrence. And honestly, considering human nature, you believe him. A group of older farmers approaches, each carrying a measuring cord. They walk the perimeter, checking alignment and spacing. One frowns, leans down, and adjusts a stake by a finger's width. Just a finger's width, but here, that tiny correction maintains the order of an entire agricultural neighborhood. You're struck by how calm the process is. No shouting, no rushing, just quiet precision. The kind of meticulousness that comes from generations of people who know exactly what they're doing. A heron swoops low overhead, gliding so gracefully it seems to mock your earlier attempts at balance. It lands on the new Chinampa, inspecting the work like an avian quality control officer. One farmer pretends to bow dramatically toward it. "Ah, the inspector has arrived," he announces. The bird ignores him completely, which only makes it funnier. Once the foundations settle, the workers begin adding the first planting rows, simple furrows running lengthwise down the island, spaced evenly by experienced hands. "It's easier to keep neat now," your guide says, "than to try to fix it later." You wonder if this is an agricultural principle or a life lesson disguised as one. The sun climbs higher, warming the earth, and the whole Chinampa breathes a soft, steamy mist. It's newborn land, still adjusting to being a surface instead of sediment. You drag your foot lightly in the soil and feel its springiness, the potential it holds. You're standing on something humans forged out of water, mud, and stubbornness, and somehow made beautiful. A canoe glides by with baskets of organic waste, fish scraps, lake plants, even shredded maize stalks. A man tosses some onto the growing Chinampa and tells you a strange fact. In some old households, people tossed hair clippings here too, because they believe human hair made crops grow straighter. Historians still argue whether this was symbolic, nutrient-related, or just a very convenient way to clean up after haircuts. You try not to imagine a cornfield whispering softly in the wind, "Yes, give me more hair." Your guide claps his hands to get your attention. "Look around," he says. "This is where neatness begins, not when the crops grow tall, but right here in the mud. If the foundation is straight, everything else follows." And as the workers step back, as the heron approves with a slow blink, as the mud settles into its final shape, you see the truth of it. What looks effortless in a mature Chinampa begins with hours of backbreaking, detail-obsessed labor. Impeccable order built on shifting water, humans insisting on precision while standing on something that technically floats. The Chinampa isn't finished yet, not by a long stretch. But it has been born, shaped by hands that trust the lake and challenge it at the same time. And you, balancing on wobbling legs, realize you're slowly falling in love with the stubborn beauty of this place. You're still perched on the soft, springy surface of the newborn Chinampa when your guide gestures for you to follow him toward a row of willow saplings stacked neatly in a canoe. They're long, thin, and slightly curved, like nature's version of tent poles. "Ahujotes," he says. "The guardians." You notice he says this with the same tone someone might use for a favorite grandparent or a particularly judgmental cat. The workers begin unloading the saplings, each one stripped of excess branches, leaving smooth trunks ready for planting. You watch as they carry them to the Chinampa edges, their feet sinking slightly into the damp soil. These are the anchors, literally the things that keep the garden from drifting off like a runaway floating island in a children's cartoon. A mainstream historical fact, The Aztecs planted ahujote trees along the Chinampa borders because their roots grew downward and outward, weaving into the lakebed like a natural rebar system. The trees locked the islands in place, prevented erosion, and stabilized the soil. Even their shade was carefully measured, not too much, not too little. You try to help by picking up a sapling, but it's heavier than it looks. You wobble. The sapling wobbles. A passing farmer wobbles in sympathy. You put it down before you accidentally uproot the entire ecological system. One of the older farmers gives you a patient smile and shows you how it's done. He presses the base of the sapling into the soft canal edge, twisting with gentle force, as if convincing the earth to make room. The tree slides in, surprisingly smooth, sinking a few feet deep until it stands upright. They like to grow fast, he tells you. Like teenagers, but with better manners. You walk along the perimeter as more saplings are planted, each spaced with intentional precision, just far enough apart to create a living fence, just close enough to support one another. The workers step back to admire their alignment, and you have to admit, it's elegant. There's something almost mathematical about the way the slender trunks rise in tidy intervals, forming a wooden frame that will, in time, become a leafy border. A fringe story enters the conversation when a woman planting a sapling leans toward you conspiratorially. Some say the willows talk to the lake, she says, patting the soil. They carry messages in their roots. She shrugs. Maybe it's superstition. Maybe not. Historians still argue whether the Aztecs saw trees as literal mediators or just symbolic ones. You nod, partly because you're fascinated, and partly because you don't want to offend any tree that might be listening. Your guide leads you to an older Chinampa nearby to show you what the saplings will become. The willows there are tall, confident, their leaves whispering in the breeze like a soft audience applause. Their trunks bend slightly toward the sun, but their roots, strong, tangled, purposeful, hold the Chinampa with an embrace so firm you can feel it when you press your palm to the ground. The entire island is tied into the lakebed through living wood. It's engineering and ecosystem in one. You crouch near the waterline, peering beneath the surface. The roots look like a miniature underwater city, twisting corridors, knotted intersections, little pockets where fish dart in and out. You imagine them gossiping about the new saplings. Oh, look, fresh neighbors. Your guide taps the willow trunk. They drink a lot, he says. They also stop the edges from collapsing. And then, with a tiny smirk, he adds, they also make good shade if you accidentally fall asleep during your shift. You wonder how many naps this tree has witnessed. The workers continue planting, forming a rhythmic procession around the Chinampa. Each sapling goes in with care, firm pressure, a twist, a final pat to the soil like tucking a child into bed. A boy follows behind them, tying reeds around the new trunks to protect them from canoes that might bump into the edges. He works with intense concentration, sticking his tongue out a little in that universal human sign of childhood focus. When he notices you watching, he straightens and says, "The trees can't walk away, so someone has to look out for them." It's such a simple statement, but you feel it settle in your chest like warm sunlight. A canoe glides past with bundles of fresh-cut willow branches, and the man rowing calls out, "Anyone need spare arms for their babies?" The workers laugh because this is apparently a running joke. Young willows need reinforcement, just like young farmers. Your guide turns to you, brushing damp soil from his hands. The neatness of a Chinampa depends on the willows, he explains. If the edges stay strong, the rows stay straight. If the rows stay straight, the harvest stays clean. Everything connects. He draws a line in the soil with his toe. The lake wants to move things. The willows say no. You watch the trees stand there, thin now, but destined for height and strength. In a year, they'll form dense green corridors between the Chinampas. In 5 years, their roots will knit the entire grid of gardens together like a quilt stitched into the earth itself. You imagine navigating the canals under their arching branches, sunlight dappling the water, the whole system breathing in quiet, orderly harmony. As the final saplings are planted, a slight tremor ripples through the soft ground. It's subtle, but you feel it, the island shifting as it accepts its new anchors. The guide nods. "That's good," he says. "It means the Chinampa is settling into its place." You're not sure if he means physically, spiritually, or both. With the Aztecs, the answer is often yes. One of the farmers steps back and surveys the scene with satisfaction. "Straight as a spear," he murmurs. Another farmer snorts. "More like straight as your cousin's spine after he tries to impress girls." They nudge each other, laughing, and you realize the neatness here isn't just a technical achievement. It's a communal one, shaped by pride, teasing, teamwork, and the shared desire to make the lake behave. The willows rustle softly, as if acknowledging the attention. You stand there, listening to the gentle hiss of leaves, the quiet lapping of water, the distant call of a heron. Everything feels interconnected, balanced, purposeful. And you finally understand. The Chinampas stay neat because the people want them neat, but also because the willows, once planted, refuse to let them be anything else. You follow your guide along the edge of the newborn Chinampa, its willow saplings standing upright like fresh recruits waiting for orders. But today isn't about the trees anymore. Today is about mud, heaping, glistening, faintly steaming piles of mud. Entire canoes arrive loaded with it, each boat weighed down so heavily that the gunnels skim the lake's surface like they're trying to kiss it. You can feel the workers' excitement, the kind of enthusiasm only people who truly appreciate soil composition can muster. "Welcome," your guide announces with exaggerated grandeur, "to Mud Basket Engineering." He sweeps his arm over the Chinampa as if revealing a priceless treasure. What lies before you is a growing mud rectangle. But to be fair, it's a very neat rectangle. Almost suspiciously neat. Like someone threatened the mud into behaving. Workers wade knee-deep into the canal, scooping sediment with long wooden shovels. The mud comes up in dents, pudding like slabs, trailing long strings of decaying plant fibers. The smell is earthy, warm, swampy, and not unpleasant, though you can imagine your modern laundry detergent weeping silently at the sight. A mainstream historical factor guide casually drops. Aztec farmers deliberately dredged nutrient-rich lake sediments and deposited them onto the Chinampas. This practice recycled organic matter, aerated the canals, and replenished the gardens with minerals. It's basically the original farm-to-table-to-farm cycle, only slimier. You watch as a pair of women working in perfect sink-dump alternating layers. Mud, then reeds, then more mud, then bundles of sediment-soaked roots, then even more mud. The Chinampa grows outward and upward, layer by deliberate layer. It might look like a giant mud cake, but the structure is surprisingly sophisticated. Each material serves a purpose: drainage, stability, aeration, insulation. If a modern engineer were to analyze it, they'd probably stare at the results, whisper, "No way," and then go lie down. The workers move with a quiet rhythm that borders on hypnotic.
Scoop.
Lift.
Toss. Smooth. Scoop.
Lift.
Toss. Smooth.
And every so often, someone cracks a joke that drifts over the water. "You missed a spot," calls one man from a canoe, pointing dramatically at a perfectly fine section. "It's where a brain fell out," the woman replies without missing a beat. Even the herons seem entertained. A fringe tidbit slips into the conversation when an older farmer paddles over and tells you that, generations ago, some believed lake creatures helped in the night, stirring nutrients, churning sediment, keeping the mud alive. He leans in with a twinkle in his eye. Historians still argue whether these stories described actual ecological processes or whether people just got poetic when they stayed up too late. You nod politely while wondering whether any mud spirit is judging your balance. Your guide beckons you closer to the edge, where the woven reed walls hold the mud in place like a giant basket. "This is the heart of it," he explains. "The weaving keeps everything tidy." You see what he means? Every weave is tight, even, precisely overlapped. There's not a single sloppy corner. The reeds form a flexible but firm barrier, letting excess water seep out while keeping the sediment neatly contained. You kneel to touch it and immediately sink your hand deeper than intended. The mud slurps loudly, like it's enjoying itself. A child standing nearby giggles. The lake likes you, he says. You withdraw your hand as gracefully as one can withdraw a hand coated in what looks like chocolate pudding but absolutely is not. Workers reinforce the Chinampa edges with more reeds, forming a crisp border. Each corner is carefully aligned, checked, and double-checked. One farmer uses his elbow as a measuring tool, a technique he claims is faster than cords because, unlike ropes, elbows don't get stolen by mischievous children. The sun climbs higher, casting shimmering reflections across the water. Shadows of willow saplings stretch over the growing mud platform. A pair of farmers climb onto the Chinampa and begin smoothing the surface with wide boards. Their movements are fluid, almost ceremonial. One hums a tune while working, and you swear the mud spreads more evenly in response. Your guide nudges you. "Want to try?" he asks, handing you a smoothing board. The workers look suddenly alert, not fearful, just ready to fix whatever chaos you unleash. You step onto the mud, which wobbles like a waterbed, and attempt a smoothing motion. The result is, well, unique. A child applauds politely, which is somehow worse than actual praise. "Good start," a woman says kindly, then gently takes the board from your hands before you invent an entirely new agricultural disaster. To your surprise, someone brings over a basket of organic waste, broken reeds, vegetable scraps, shredded corn husks. They sprinkle this across the top layer. "Adds texture," your guide says, though you suspect he just likes saying that. A strange but fascinating fact emerges from a passing comment. Some households added ashes from cooking fires to the mud mix. It improved soil pH, though some believed it also sent warmth into the earth. Historians still argue whether this warmth was literal, symbolic, or a poetic flourish made by someone who really loved their fireplace. As the layering continues, the Chinampa becomes firmer, more defined. Its edges crisp up. The corners sharpen. Everything about it begins to look intentional, even beautiful. A worker steps back and announces proudly, "There. A basket strong enough to fool the lake." It's a bold statement, considering the lake is right there listening, but the man seems unafraid. Your guide tells you to stand at the center. "Feel it settle," he says. You do. And beneath your feet, you sense the weight redistributing, the reeds flexing, the mud sinking slightly into its woven cradle. The Chinampa sighs, a soft, almost imperceptible settling sound, and it feels like the earth agreeing to exist here. More smoothing, more layering, more patient shaping. By midday, the space has transformed into a raised, tidy platform ready for planting. It no longer looks like a pile of mud. It looks like intention, craftsmanship, community. It looks neat. The workers gather their tools, stepping back to admire their creation. The older farmer nods approvingly. "Straight," he says simply. And in this world, that single word is a compliment of the highest order. You glance at the willow saplings, the woven walls, the perfectly smoothed surface. Everything fits together, woven, layered, balanced. And you realize, the neatness of the Aztec floating gardens doesn't happen by accident. It begins here, in mud and reeds, shaped by hands that know how to make a lake behave. You wake before the sun fully blooms over Lake Texcoco, the Chinampa still damp from the night's breath. The workers are already gathering their tools, smooth paddles, narrow shovels, woven baskets, and your guide ushers you into a canoe so quietly that the water barely stirs. "Today," he whispers, "you learn how the gardens drink." You drift into a canal so narrow the willows on either side brush your shoulders like polite but persistent grandmothers fixing your posture. The water here is almost perfectly still, a glassy black ribbon reflecting the first hints of gold in the sky. It is quiet, not silent, because silence doesn't live here, but a breathing quiet, the kind that makes you lower your voice instinctively. "This," your guide says, trailing his fingers through the surface, "is irrigation by whisper." You blink, thinking he's being poetic. He is, but he's also being literal. These canals were engineered, centuries before pumps and pipes, to move water so gently that it nourished the gardens without flooding them, eroding them, or throwing the perfect neatness into chaos. A mainstream historical fact, The Aztecs used a combination of controlled canal depth, planted barriers, and strategic openings to manage the irrigation cycle. Water flowed without ever becoming unruly. Your canoe drifts past a narrow inlet where workers use long poles to stir the canal bed. Not wildly, but in lazy, circular motions. You ask why, and a woman answers with a grin. To wake it up. Then, seeing your confusion, she adds more helpfully, keeps the nutrients moving. If the water sits too still, it gets sulky. A fringe tidbit from your guide. Some farmers believed that each canal had its own temperament, some affectionate, some stubborn, some that refused to cooperate unless given a morning song. Historians still argue whether this belief reflected genuine ritual practice or whether the farmers were just using personality metaphors to explain hydraulic behavior. Either way, you can't help but look at the canal as if it might wink back. As you continue drifting, you notice how every curve, every opening, every narrowing is intentional. The canals are shaped like gentle veins, pulsing with life. Willow roots dip into the water like casual straws, stabilizing the banks while filtering sediments. Aquatic plants form soft borders, creating natural speed bumps to slow the current. Everywhere you look, nature is sculpted into order. You trail your hand along the surface, expecting ripples. None appear. The water absorbs the motion like velvet. It really is whisper-level irrigation, subtle, steady, controlled. Your guide points to a pair of farmers adjusting a woven gate at the entrance to a side canal. It's a simple structure, bundles of reeds tied into a slatted barrier, but it transforms the water flow instantly. You watch the current redirect, slow, settle. The Chinampa edges respond like contented pets. This is how we stop the gardens from drowning, he explains, and how we keep them from starving. He lifts the gate a few inches. The water gurgles softly as it slips through. Balance, he says. Always balance. You nod, though you suspect maintaining this balance requires more daily patience than you possess. Further down the canal, you encounter a group of men using long scoops to clear floating debris. Unlike the chaotic pond skimming you've attempted in your modern life, these men move like synchronized dancers. They clear only what needs clearing, leaving beneficial algae and microorganisms intact. The neatness here isn't about sterility, it's about harmony. A child hops onto the edge of your canoe and plops down beside you, confident you won't capsize, even though you are decidedly not confident. Look, he says, pointing to a tiny swirl in the water. That's where the canal breathes. You lean closer, seeing a subtle spiral, barely perceptible. It looks like nothing, and yet everything. A perfect, natural circulation point created when the canal was first dug. That swirl feeds 3 gardens, he says proudly, as if he personally invented hydrodynamics. Your canoe turns into a broader canal where the sunlight glitters in broken shards. Boats glide through silently, delivering compost, seedlings, tools, and occasionally gossip. Here, the irrigation becomes more visible. Slow-moving waves push against the Chinampa walls with gentle persistence. Workers check the water levels with carved sticks, adjusting gates as needed. One man crouches at the canal's edge, tapping the soil with the back of his hand. Still cool, he murmurs. Still happy. You try the same move. Your tap is less of a gentle assessment and more of a slap, splashing mud onto your pants. The man's face says everything. You are not yet ready for soil whispering. A small drama unfolds ahead. A canal section has begun moving too quickly after someone opened a gate too far. The water threatens to tumble into the Chinampa rows like an overeager guest at a party. But within seconds, 3 workers leap into action. One lowers a reed barrier, another lifts a mud baffle, the third signals upstream to adjust the flow. The current tames itself instantly. The workers grin at you. The canals behave. One of them says, because we behave. You wonder what the canals would think of your behavior. Your guide asks if you'd like to try opening a gate. You do. Against your better judgment. The gate is heavier than it looks, and when you hoist it even a little, the water surges like a toddler freed from a nap. The farmers shout, not in panic, but with the urgent enthusiasm of people watching a baby deer attempt roller skating. They rush in, stabilize the flow, and pat you on the back. Strong arms, one says kindly. No precision, but strong arms. It is the nicest way anyone has ever told you you're bad at water management. The loop continues, gates adjusted, sediment stirred, plants trimmed, water tested, currents guided. And always, always neatness maintained. Not the rigid kind enforced by rules and rulers, but the organic kind that comes from knowing a place so intimately that you can anticipate its moods. You drift back toward the central canal, watching the irrigation system hum in perfect quiet. No pumps, no motors, just water, gravity, vegetation, and human hands working in harmony. Your guide leans back, folding his arms behind his head. People think Chinampas stay neat because we tidy them, he says. But really, we listen to them. And as another whisper of water curls against the boat, you believe him. You return to the Chinampas after the midday heat softens, when the sun has mellowed from harsh spotlight to warm lantern. Shadows from the willow saplings stretch long and delicate over the water, and the canals glow with the lazy shimmer of late afternoon. Your guide greets you with a mischievous grin and hands you a woven basket. Today, he says, you join the weeding patrol. You stare at the empty basket, then at the endless rows of plants. All of this needs weeding? He laughs softly. All of this stays neat because we weed before things get messy. You'd expected perhaps a dramatic title, something like the Elite Weed Guardians or the League of Leaf Pluckers, but the patrol is simply a group of farmers who move quietly and methodically through the gardens every single day. One woman claps her hand sharply, gathering the group like a teacher collecting students who are extremely good at following directions. The moment you step onto the Chinampa, you understand why this matters. The rows are immaculate, straight-edged mounds with even spacing, tidy plant groupings, and soil so smooth it looks groomed. Not a rogue stalk, not a rebellious sprout, not even a leaf lying sideways. It's almost unsettling, like nature took a look at the Aztecs and said, "Fine, you do it." A mainstream historical fact your guide shares as you begin working. Chinampas were incredibly productive, so productive that they could yield up to 7 harvests a year in certain conditions. But that only works when weeds are kept almost fanatically under control. Anything that siphoned nutrients, shaded seedlings, or disrupted water flow had to go. You crouch beside a row of amaranth, trying to mimic the precise posture of the woman beside you. She moves with the efficiency of someone plucking threads from cloth. Quick, clean, certain. You reach for your first weed, pinch it between your fingers, pull, and rip up a chunk of the irrigation furrow. You freeze. The woman beside you stares. Your guide clears his throat. Somewhere in the distance, a heron judges you. Very calmly, the woman takes the clump from your hands, pats the soil flat, fixes the row, and hands you a smaller weed to practice on. You accept it with the humility of a student who has just learned the difference between confidence and competence. The patrol spreads out. Some work in silence, some hum quietly, some gossip in low tones about whose nephew left his sandals floating in the canal again. You shuffle between them, doing your best to keep the basket from filling exclusively with your dignity. As the work continues, you notice that weeds aren't the only things the patrol removes. Fallen leaves, wilted stems, stray bits of reed. Even a misplaced pebble gets flicked away with the flick of a wrist. This isn't just weeding, it's curating. These people aren't merely tending plants, they're maintaining an entire living artwork. A fringe tidbit emerges when an older man leans over and says, "Back in my grandmother's time, some farmers kept small charms at the corners of their Chinampas to scare away lazy weeds." Lazy weeds, he explains, were plants that sprouted crooked or refused to grow upright. Historians still argue whether those charms were symbolic or actually influenced growth, he says, shrugging. But my grandmother said her corn always listened. You smile. You also glance at the nearest corn stalk, just in case. The patrol regroups at the canal's edge, where a young man is pulling a floating mat of algae toward the surface. It's emerald green, soft and silky. He wrings it out like a towel and tosses clumps into a basket. Not weeds, he explains. Just keeping the water neat. Algae, allowed to flourish unchecked, could choke the canals, reduce circulation, and make the irrigation whispers more like irrigation grumbles. Your guide motions for you to follow as the patrol moves to the next garden. The sun is sliding lower now, making the water glow amber. A child uses a tiny reed rake, clearly handmade, to tidy the soil around bean plants. You're amazed at the precision. He has the seriousness of a gardener twice his age and the agility of someone who has never sprained an ankle stepping off a curb. He looks up at you and says, "The Chinampa likes when you clean its face." Then he brushes soil smooth with the soft edge of his hand. You try the same move. Your soil looks like a cat sat on it.
You pretend you meant to do that.
As the group progresses, you begin to see patterns. The patrol doesn't move randomly. They follow a specific route, looping through gardens in a coordinated cycle. The neatness doesn't come from frantic work. It comes from consistent, gentle upkeep. A philosophy of fix small things before they become big things. Soon, your basket fills with weeds, wilted tips, and little bits of debris. The farmers dump theirs into a compost boat floating lazily nearby. The boat smells exactly how you'd expect a boat full of unwanted plant material to smell, but in a comforting, earthy way. Half fertilizer factory, half herbal tea. The patrol ends at a narrow canal near a stand of young willows. The workers rinse their tools, wash their hands, and quietly admire their progress. The Chinampas gleam in the golden hour, rows crisp, edges sharp, plants upright and proud. Even the water looks tidier, somehow. Your guide nods toward the scene. People think neatness is about perfection, he says. But here, it's about attention. He kicks a pebble into the canal. It ripples once, then disappears. You watch the gardens every day, and they watch you back. You stand there, the air warm and soft, the light fading, the basket empty again. You realize the weeding patrol isn't just maintenance. It's relationship. A quiet conversation between humans and landscape. And as the last sliver of sun slips behind the willows, their leaves rustling in a gentle hush, you feel it too. The floating gardens stay neat because someone cares enough to listen to them, one tiny weed at a time. You return at dawn on a morning so clear it looks polished. The Chinampas stretch before you in perfect rectangles, each one catching the pale sunlight like a quiet exhale. But today, your guide announces, isn't about building or weeding. Today is about rhythm, specifically the steady pulse of crop rotation that keeps these floating gardens not only neat, but astonishingly productive. He hands you a small wooden tablet etched with rows, symbols, and sun marks. It looks like a calendar, a field guide, and a puzzle had a very organized baby. This, he says, is the rotation pattern. Lose it, and the Chinampa will judge you forever. You clutch it like an artifact from a museum you are absolutely not qualified to handle. A mainstream historical fact, the Aztecs practiced sophisticated crop rotation to maintain soil nutrients, cycling maize, beans, squash, chilies, amaranth, and flowers in repeating seasonal sequences. It wasn't random. It wasn't improvised. It was planning woven into time itself. Your guide leads you to a row of mature maize.
Tall.
Golden. Majestic. The kind of corn you'd see on a harvest mural, except here it grows in ruler-straight rows, spaced with mathematical precision. Workers move through the stalks, harvesting only what's at peak ripeness. Behind them, others pull up the remaining plants, leaving the soil open and breathing. See, your guide says. Corn is heavy. It takes a lot from the soil. So next season, we give the garden a lighter guest. He points to a nearby plot where beans twist upward around reed supports. Beans put nutrients back in. They're polite like that. One worker overhears and calls out, "Beans are the good guests. Corn is that cousin who eats everything in your house and still asks for more tortillas." You laugh. The Chinampa does not. The Chinampa is deeply serious about nutrient cycles. As maize comes out, compost goes in. Workers spread crushed lake sediment, decomposing reeds, old roots, and algae. A blend so rich you swear it sparkles in the sun. The soil darkens, softens, becomes fragrant. Like chocolate cake batter. But do not eat. A fringe tidbit drifts into the conversation when a young woman spreading mulch explains, "My grandmother used to say that each Chinampa has its favorite sequence. Some like maize after beans. Some like amaranth before squash." Historians still argue whether that's empirical knowledge or just her Chinampa flirting with her. You appreciate that in this world, soil having preferences is just part of the job. You walk beside your guide as he shows you the planting blocks. Each Chinampa is divided not only into rows, but into rotational zones, small, tidy rectangles within the larger tidy rectangle. It's like agricultural origami. Workers kneel in one of these blocks, gently tucking bean seeds into the soil. Their hands move quickly, precisely. No hesitation. No wasted motion. It feels less like planting and more like playing a familiar instrument. Why so neat, you ask? Because we need to see what the crops are telling us, your guide replies. A crooked row hides problems. A straight one reveals them. He gestures to a block where squash vines will grow next, vines that could sprawl wildly if not managed. Farmers have already laid reed mats along the borders, tiny fences to coax the vines inward. You imagine squash as a toddler who needs a clear playpen. A child walks by dragging a bundle of amaranth stalks taller than he is. He stops, glances at your puzzled expression, and explains, "We plant the tall ones where the wind is strong. It keeps them straight." He delivers this with professor-like seriousness, then immediately nearly falls into the canal trying to pick up the bundle again. Your guide leans close. The Chinampa trains us young. As the sun climbs, rotation work ripples across the landscape. Entire blocks shift identity. Maize becomes beans. Beans become flowers. Empty soil becomes potential. Everywhere you see patterns, diagonal, linear, circular, marking different sequences. It's like watching a time-lapse of months unfolding in minutes. You kneel beside a woman planting squash seeds. She presses each into the soil with the same calm precision you've seen all morning. "Rotating crops," she murmurs, "keeps the soil from forgetting how to breathe." Then she adds with a grin, "Also keeps the plants from fighting. Corn and squash don't always get along." You hadn't realized vegetables had interpersonal drama, but you suppose after section SX's commentary on lazy weeds, nothing surprises you. Another team works farther down the Chinampa, cutting back old flower stalks. The blossoms, marigolds, dahlias, and other brilliant colors will return next cycle. Their roots will help structure the soil. Their petals, once dried, will feed rituals, markets, and compost alike. A worker lifts a handful of soil and lets it fall through his fingers. "This block is ready for amaranth next," he says. Light eater. Good listener. You are beginning to suspect that personality traits assigned to crops are a universal farming language. Your guide invites you to try planting beans in a freshly cleared block. You plant one seed slightly too deep, another slightly too crooked, and a third at a depth that could only be described as enthusiastically incorrect. The woman beside you smiles kindly and fixes all three without comment. You thank her. She pats your shoulder. The Chinampa teaches patience. Then she adds, in a whisper, she also teaches humility. Workers transition seamlessly from one block to the next. Their steps follow the same invisible rhythm, a choreography passed through generations. Every movement, harvest, clearing, replowing, planting, keeps the garden neat, nourished, and balanced. Rotation isn't just strategy. It's the heartbeat of the entire floating system. As the day cools again, your guide leads you to the edge of a canal. You look back across the Chinampas and see order, not sterile, rigid order, but living order. Rows in transition, patterns shifting, soil darkening, leaves shimmering, workers humming the same tune that the water seems to echo. The Chinampas stay neat because they change constantly but always intentionally. And as the wind lifts the willow leaves and the sun dips low, you feel it in your bones. Neatness here isn't an aesthetic. It's a rhythm, a pulse, a way of breathing. Evening slides gently across Lake Texcoco, painting the canals in soft purples and warmed golds as if the sky itself is exhaling after a long day. You think the Chinampas might finally be done with activity. After all, you've already witnessed planting, weeding, dredging, irrigating, and precisely choreographed rotations that would make a symphony conductor sweat. But your guide gives you a sideways smile, the kind that suggests you have no idea how much work it takes to keep floating gardens perfectly neat. Tonight, he says, we meet the pest control specialists. You brace for warriors in feathered helmets, maybe armed with tiny obsidian tweezers. Instead, a cheerful group of farmers greets you with bundles of chili peppers, pots of ash, bowls of lake mud, and a bag of powdered lime that absolutely should not be inhaled. There's also a small, smoldering incense bundle sending up thin curls of fragrant smoke. This, a woman explains, handing you a clay bowl of crushed chilies and water, is how we keep the bugs polite. A mainstream historical fact: Aztec farmers relied on natural pest control, chili smoke, lime powder, ash barriers, physical traps, and companion planting. They cultivated marigolds not only for beauty, but because their scent discouraged insects. They didn't need chemical sprays. They had strategy, observation, and occasionally, a spicy persuasion campaign. You follow the group into the maze rows. The farmers work with deliberate calm, sprinkling ash around the base of each stalk. When you ask why, a man taps the ground with his foot, keeps crawling things from crawling where they shouldn't. Then, with the tone of someone sharing a universal truth, he adds, everything listens to ash. Is that scientifically proven? Debatable. But here, completely believable. A fringe tidbit emerges as another farmer waves a smoking clay pot over the bean plants. Some say the steam of chilies carries messages to the air spirits, she murmurs. Historians still argue whether this was meant literally or symbolically. She shrugs. Either way, the bugs hate it. You cough as the chili smoke passes a little too close. The bugs are not the only ones who hate it. The patrol continues, and you begin to understand the artistry of it. Ash is placed in thin, perfect circles, no clumps, no smudges. The lime is dusted in straight, tidy lines like powdered sugar on a pastry. Even pest control here has aesthetic standards. A boy runs up with a reed shaker, essentially a rattle filled with pebbles. Help scare the birds, he announces proudly, then shakes it with such enthusiasm that several actual birds flee the area, probably reconsidering all their life choices. The boy beams. Works every time. Your guide smirks. Birds learn fast, he says. Kids learn faster. You notice marigold patches at the edges of several Chinampas, vibrant oranges and yellows glowing like little lanterns in the fading light. They protect the crops too, a woman explains while trimming the petals neatly. Their smell confuses pests. She pauses. Also confuses visitors who think we just like pretty borders. She gives you a pointed look. You absolutely thought that. As twilight deepens, some farmers set out shallow clay bowls filled with lake water and sticky sap. Traps, your guide notes. For insects who can't resist reflections. You peer into one bowl and see a few curious bugs already investigating the shiny surface like tourists approaching a suspiciously cheap buffet. Further along, you see a man painting a thin ribbon of mud across the top of squash vines. For what, you ask? Slows down the night crawlers, he replies. They don't like sticky paths. Then he adds, tapping the mud carefully into an even stripe, and a neat line keeps them twice as confused. You didn't realize pests had aesthetic expectations, but you accept this information without argument. Just when you think you've seen every technique, your guide stops at a small shrine at the corner of a Chinampa. Candles flicker. A scattering of petals. A carved figure. Pests aren't the only thing we ask help with, he says softly. Order needs guardians too. A group of farmers approaches, gathering around the shrine. They whisper a few rhythmic phrases. Not quite chanting, not quite singing, something comforting, steady, almost like a lullaby for the land. One of them glances at you and grins. It keeps the gardens calm, she says. Calm gardens grow neat. You are about to ask whether gardens can feel calm when a frog hops across your foot with the serene confidence of a creature who absolutely belongs here more than you do. As full darkness settles, torches are lit along the canal paths. Their flames flicker in the breeze, reflecting in the water like twin constellations. The pest control team moves through the Chinampas one last time, checking every ash ring, every smoke pot, every trap, every planted decoy flower. Each line is perfect, each row untouched, each garden protected. Then something unexpected happens. The farmers pause. They stand still, listening. You hear nothing. No buzzing, no rustling, no fluttering. That, your guide whispers, is the sound of a neat garden. You feel a shiver, not from cold, but from the quiet harmony that settles over the landscape. These floating gardens aren't just maintained, they're defended, respected, negotiated with. It's not warfare with pests, it's diplomacy with nature. As the farmers gather their tools and head back toward the central canal, someone hands you the reed rattle the boy used earlier.
For luck, she says.
You shake it gently. A few distant birds squawk in protest. Careful, your guide warns. Power like that should be used wisely. And as torchlight ripples across the water and the Chinampas rest beneath a moon rising slow and silver, you realize something profound. Neatness here isn't forced. It's preserved, protected, encouraged. Even the pests understand the system. And tonight, you shake the rattle one last time. Not too loudly, and the floating gardens, in their immaculate calm, seem to smile. Night settles over Lake Texcoco like a soft blanket, warm at the edges, cool at the seams. The moon climbs slowly, silver, deliberate, a lantern hanging above the Chinampa maze. You'd think the day's work would end with the last whisper of chilly smoke drifting off the fields.
But no.
Your guide taps your shoulder, handing you a small torch and a reed staff. Nighttime, he says, is when the gardens need eyes. You raise an eyebrow.
Eyes?
For what? The Chinampas look peaceful, their neat rows glowing quietly under the moonlight. But as you step into a canoe with the night watch team, 3 farmers and a sleepy-looking dog whose job appears to be emotional support, you understand. Daytime neatness is earned through labor. Nighttime neatness is protected through vigilance. The canoe glides through the dark canal, barely breaking the surface. Fireflies sparkle along the water like drifting embers. A light breeze ripples through the willows, making them whisper secrets you aren't sure you're supposed to hear. A mainstream historical fact: theft wasn't common on the Chinampas, but it did happen, usually small-scale stealing of produce or tools. And at night, animals could cause trouble too. Coyotes, rodents, even the occasional bold bird searching for a midnight snack. So farmers formed rotating patrols that drifted through the gardens after dark, watching for disturbances and maintaining order. Your guide points to the water, where a faint ripple moves against the current. Probably a muskrat, he says. If they dig into the sides, the walls weaken. You grip your staff tighter, imagining yourself courageously confronting a rogue muskrat. The dog beside you yawns, unimpressed by your mental bravery. The patrol moves in silence except for the soft creak of wooden paddles. The torchlight flickers across the Chinampa edges, turning the neat rows into stripes of alternating light and shadow. You realize how vulnerable the gardens look at night. Open, quiet, almost too peaceful. It's easy to see why people stay awake to watch over them. A subtle movement catches your eye. On a distant Chinampa, something rustles. Your guide raises a hand. The canoe stops. Everyone listens. It's quiet. Too quiet. Then thump. A fat, audacious bird hops into view, pecking at a basket of beans as if it paid rent. The farmers sigh in unison. One man cups his hands and lets out a sharp hiss. The bird freezes, glares back with the indignation of a creature whose snack time has been rudely interrupted, then flaps away into the night. The farmers shake their heads. Birds, one mutters, think they own the canals. As the canoe moves on, your guide points out tiny markers placed along Chinampa edges, pebbles arranged in patterns, carved reed bundles, even feathers. These help us see shifts, he explains. If an animal or a thief disturbs something, we know exactly where. It's a subtle system, simple, effective, and impossibly tidy. Even their security measures are neat. A fringe tidbit drifts into the conversation when an elderly watcher tells you about old stories of night spirits who supposedly prowled the Chinampas. They weren't scary, he says. Just mischievous. They liked to borrow tools. He grins. Historians still argue whether this was metaphor, myth, or a polite way to say someone misplaced their hoe again. You glance at your own tools and mentally promise not to lose them. The canoe arrives at a section where the moonlight reflects brightly. Here, the watch team checks the willow saplings. One man grips a trunk and gives it a small shake. You expect the tree to wobble dramatically, but it's firm, anchored, steady. If roots get loose, he explains, we fix it before the Chinampa drifts. You imagine waking up to discover your floating garden has floated away in the night, like a runaway raft. The dog sneezes, as if agreeing this would be embarrassing. As you continue along the canal, the air grows cooler. You hear croaking, distant splashes, the chirping of insects. But the Chinampas themselves remain still, rows holding their shape, walls holding their line, plants standing straight like soldiers at rest. Then, up ahead, you see movement again, not animal this time, but people. A small canoe is drifting suspiciously close to a Chinampa that isn't theirs. The watchers stiffen. Your guide whispers, "Stay quiet." The watchers paddle closer, not aggressively, but confidently. As they approach, the other canoe freezes. A man inside looks guilty, holding a basket of maize in a way that suggests he absolutely should not be holding a basket of maize at midnight. One watcher clears his throat. "That your Chinampa?" "Yes," the man tries. A woman crosses her arms. "Then why is your canoe drifting the wrong direction?" The man deflates.
Fine.
"No." He hands back the maize, murmuring an apology. The patrol doesn't scold him further. They simply escort him back toward his own section, their torches glowing like quiet reminders of community expectations. Your guide leans over. "Most trouble at night isn't crime," he whispers. "It's desperation. Or confusion. Or someone thinking the dark makes them invisible." He gestures to the moonlit water. But out here, nothing is invisible. You continue gliding until the dog suddenly perks up, ears stiff, nose twitching. He growls softly. The farmers follow his gaze to a rustling near a planted squash patch. A coyote. Lean, hungry-looking but hesitant. The farmers stand at the edge and begin making soft clicking sounds, not threatening, not loud, just enough to signal, "These aren't your squash." The coyote watches them for a moment, weighing its options, then melts back into the darkness. When it's gone, your guide exhales. "Animals understand boundaries," he says. "But we remind them." At the final stretch, you pass by dozens of Chinampas glowing silver beneath the moon. Their perfect rows cast long shadows. Their willow borders sway gently. Even the water seems to shimmer in organized ripples. You realize something unexpected. Neatness doesn't sleep. It simply changes shifts. The night watchers lean on their paddles, satisfied. They've protected the order, maintained the quiet, ensured that morning will find the gardens exactly as they should be, calm, clean, undisturbed. Your guide smiles at you. Now you've seen what neatness looks like when the world is dark. And as the canoe glides home, torchlight fading behind you, you understand. The Aztecs didn't keep their floating gardens neat by luck. They kept them neat because even the night was part of their caretaking. Morning in the Chinampa district has a different kind of quiet, an alert quiet, a checking their reflection before going out quiet. The sun rises slowly over Lake Texcoco, warming the willow branches and casting long golden stripes across the water. The workers are already awake, bustling with a nervous, excited energy you haven't seen before. Your guide hands you a cloth and a small reed brush. "Today," he says, "the gardens prepare to impress the entire empire." You blink. Who exactly are they impressing? "The Tlatelolco market," he explains, as if saying the moon or the gods. "The biggest market in the world. Our produce must arrive flawless." And suddenly it clicks. Today is harvest refinement, the final polish before crops travel to the enormous marketplace where tens of thousands gather daily. You've heard stories about Tlatelolco, sections for pottery, feathers, obsidian, food, textiles, and luxuries. Yet even among all that grandeur, Chinampa produce is considered elite. Because Chinampas don't just grow food. They grow perfect food. Workers move into formation across the gardens like a delicate army of curators. Harvesters work ahead, picking ripe vegetables and herbs with swift, decisive motions. Behind them, refiners clean each plant, removing excess dirt, trimming leaves, arranging baskets with aesthetic precision, almost like preparing an art exhibit. The air smells like crushed basil, damp earth, and pride. A mainstream historical fact. Produce from Chinampas supplied not only local households but also elite kitchens and temple offerings. Quality standards were extremely high. Crops had to be fresh, uniformly shaped, and neatly bundled. You're beginning to understand why. A young man near you lifts a basket of tomatoes. Every single one is round, glossy, and almost suspiciously identical. You look at your own pantry back home, where tomatoes regularly look like lopsided stress balls, and you feel judged by vegetables. He catches you staring and laughs. Straight rows grow straight food, he says, arranging them like jewels. Your guide points out the subtle aesthetic touches, the diagonal stacking of chilies for airflow, the reed ties around bundles of herbs, the strategic placement of marigold petals in baskets of greens to deter pests and delight customers. Everything is neat. Everything is symbolic. Everything is part of the performance. A fringe tidbit emerges when a grandmotherly farmer taps you with her broom and whispers, "Some say the gods come disguised as market customers." So, if your vegetables look messy, you might offend someone powerful. She winks. Historians still argue whether this belief enforced quality, or just gave people a fun reason to overthink aesthetics. You nod solemnly and try to arrange a handful of peppers in a basket. They slide into an accidental pile that looks like chaos wearing a hat. A small child silently takes them from you and fixes them without saying a word. You've never felt gently roasted by a toddler before. Along the canals, transport canoes line up like sleek aquatic caravans. They're freshly scrubbed. Yes, they clean the boats too, and padded with woven mats to protect delicate produce. You watch as farmers load the baskets with exquisite care, spacing heavier items at the bottom, fragile herbs on top, flowers nestled around them like protective halos. One canoe holds nothing but marigold blossoms, an explosion of gold so bright it looks like captured sunlight. Another carries chilies arranged in spirals. Another is stacked with amaranth stalks placed in perfectly parallel lines. You've seen produce displays at grocery stores, but this is something else entirely. This is artistry. Your guide nudges you as a group of elite buyers arrives early, messengers, temple representatives, professional cooks. One examines the beans with a stern expression. Uniform size, she says approvingly. Last week's were slightly too curved. The farmer bows with subtle pride. You whisper to your guide, "They're judging bean curvature?" He whispers back, "Oh yes. The market is war. Beautiful war." A tiny drama breaks out when a young farmer discovers one, yes, one, crooked chili in his basket. He stares at it with a look normally reserved for betrayal. The supervising elder comes over, examines the chili like a jeweler evaluating a flawed ruby, and simply shakes her head. The chili is removed. A replacement is selected. Order is restored. Everything must be flawless. Your guide points to a nearby Chinampa where flowers grow in bright rows. These aren't just decorations, he explains. They go to market too. For ceremonies, offerings, celebrations. People expect neat bundles, clean stems, fresh petals. You watch as workers trim each flower with little obsidian blades, laying them out in tidy lines so straight they could be measuring tools themselves. It's mesmerizing. Then you join a polishing team. Yes, polishing produce is a real job. Your task is simple: gently brush dirt off chayote. You try. You succeed. Your chayote gleams. A woman nods approvingly. You feel like you've won an award you didn't know existed. As the sun climbs higher, the energy intensifies. Canoes push off one by one, gliding toward the heart of Tenochtitlan like ceremonial offerings. Each boat is a floating still life, baskets arranged symmetrically, colors balanced, weights distributed evenly. Even the paddling is synchronized to prevent jostling. Your guide smirks. You see, the neatness isn't only in how we grow food. It's in how we deliver it. A child waves proudly as her family's canoe begins its journey. Our herbs will be at the emperor's table, she announces, chest puffed out. You watch the canal fill with boats, greens, reds, yellows, blossoms, roots, herbs, grains, all moving like a slow, gentle parade. Their reflections shimmer in doubled symmetry. The Chinampas behind you stand immaculate once again, the neatness renewed and refreshed as if the land itself is preparing for the next cycle. Your guide rests an elbow on your shoulder. The floating gardens are neat, he says, because the people demand excellence, not just for themselves, but for everyone they feed. He gestures to the receding boats. Tlatelolco expects the best. We give the best. As the last canoe disappears into the distance, leaving ripples that spread across the lake like quiet applause, you realize something profound. The Chinampas aren't neat because someone tidies them. They're neat because someone expects them to be extraordinary. And every harvest day, they rise to the occasion. By the time the sun dips into a warm, honey-gold haze, you think the day might finally be slowing down. The canals shimmer lazily, the Chinampas sigh in their immaculate alignment, and birds settle like punctuation marks against the sky. But your guide has that familiar not-so-fast expression. He hands you a long-handled rake, a coiled rope, and what appears to be a mud-resistant sense of optimism. Tonight, he says, is communal cleanup. You look around. Everything already looks pristine. What is left to clean? He grins. Only everything you don't notice. Because neatness isn't only about soil and plants. It's also about water. Edges. Boundaries. The spaces between the gardens. A mainstream historical fact. Entire neighborhoods, Kalpuli, organized regular communal labor days, known as Tikio, where every able-bodied person contributed to shared tasks. Maintaining the Chinampa canals was one of the most important responsibilities. If one family neglected their section, the whole water system could suffer. Tonight, you join a Tikio. Families gather along the canal banks. Grandparents, parents, children, cousins, neighbors. Everyone has a tool. Everyone has a role. Even the dogs seem ready to supervise. The work begins with scraping the canal edges. Farmers line up along the water with reed rakes, pulling debris toward their boats. Fallen leaves, loose algae, stray sticks, the occasional floating sandal, claimed by no one, because evidently sandal abandonment is a universal human trait. The sound of rakes in the water creates a soft, rhythmic shhhhhh that blends with the breeze through the willows. One man hauls up a dripping mass of vegetation and declares triumphantly, "Look, the lake made a wig." Children sprint over to poke it before their mothers redirect them to more productive tasks. You try raking. The first few pulls are smooth. Then your rake snags something heavy and nearly yanks you into the canal. 3 farmers rush in, steady your shoulders, rescue your rake, and examine the culprit, a large rock. A boy squints at it. Who throws rocks in canals? His sister replies, maybe the lake was bored. A fringe tidbit appears when an elderly woman mutters that some people used to toss ceremonial stones into canals to keep the water spirits entertained. She shrugs. Historians still argue whether that was tradition, superstition, or someone making excuses for skipping cleanup duty. The community works in a fluid choreography. One group dredges mud from shallow corners, reshaping slopes so water flows evenly. Another trims the overhanging willow branches, careful to leave their symmetry intact. A third scrubs the wood of dock posts with fibrous brushes until they gleam. You get the impression that if the Aztecs had invented stainless steel, they would have polished it daily. Down the canal, a group of kids is tasked with surface patrol. Equipped with small nets, they dart around catching floating bits, leaves, petals, a stray tortilla that someone definitely dropped at lunch and denied. They take their job very seriously. One girl scoops up a single feather and announces proudly, "I saved the canal." No one argues. Adults, meanwhile, move bundled reeds into perfect reinforcement walls around the Chinampas. Their hands work quickly, weaving new reeds into old lattice, tightening knots, straightening edges. Watching them is like watching a basket being made around the entire landscape. Your guide crouches beside a canal marker stone, a small carved block half submerged in water. He lifts it, cleans the underside, and places it back exactly where it was. Precisely. Perfectly. You didn't even realize it was crooked before. Now you can't imagine how you didn't see it. Clean canals mean clean gardens, he says. And clean gardens mean clean food. It's all connected. As the group moves forward, a new sound rises, a rhythmic chant, low and playful. Workers sing as they push floating debris boats downstream. The melody is simple, repetitive, mesmerizing, like the lake itself humming along. It keeps everyone in sync, even you, who is still figuring out how not to fling mud onto your own shoes. The chant suddenly stops when someone finds a particularly large clump of invasive water weeds. The farmers gather around. One woman pokes it with a stick. "This is the enemy," she declares dramatically. Another man nods solemnly. "It mocks us." The group erupts into laughter before hoisting the weed mass up and into the compost boat. Even their humor is neat. They joke, but they finish the job with precision. You join a team cleaning the canal bottoms. They use long poles to stir sediment, preventing stagnation and encouraging nutrient circulation. The process is slow, meditative. As the sediment swirls, the water changes from cloudy to clear, settling into perfect calm again. You feel oddly proud of the swirl you created, even if it briefly made you look like you summoned a mud storm. A woman pats your arm. "Good," she says. "The Chinampa forgives your earlier mistakes." You don't ask which earlier mistakes she means. There are many candidates. As twilight deepens into blue dusk, torches are lit along the walkways. The reflections dance across the water, turning the canals into glowing ribbons. The workers stand together on a wide Chinampa edge, admiring the now pristine water paths. Everything is sharper, straighter, balanced, orderly. Your guide gestures to the entire scene. Neatness, he says, is not just a personal habit. It's a community promise. You watch as neighbors laugh, exchange small gifts, share food from baskets, and recount the day's events like traded treasures. The Chinampas behind them glow in the torchlight, rows perfect, edges crisp, water smooth. And you suddenly understand. The floating gardens stay neat because everyone treats them like shared lungs. If the canals breathe easily, the gardens thrive. If the gardens thrive, the people thrive. If the people thrive, they keep the canals neat. One continuous loop of care. As the torches burn bright and the night wraps around the Chinampa district like a warm blanket, you feel the truth settle gently around you. Neatness here doesn't come from individuals. It comes from unity. Night has fully draped itself over the Chinampas, deep and velvety, when your guide leads you toward a narrow footbridge lit by soft, flickering torches. You expect the workday to be over. After all, the communal cleanup has already wrapped the canals in meticulous order. But tonight, he explains, you'll witness another layer of neatness maintenance, one far older, quieter, and wrapped in the soft rustle of incense smoke. Priestly inspection, he says. The gardens don't just need tending. They need blessing. You're not sure what that means, but the others around you straighten their shoulders as if preparing to meet a respected teacher. Ahead, a small procession moves slowly along the canal, priests in white cotton robes, their hair bound with woven bands, their arms decorated with tiny marigold strands. They carry polished gourds filled with incense, bundles of herbs, and tools carved with intricate symbols. A mainstream historical fact your guide murmurs. Priests oversaw agricultural cycles, offering guidance on planting dates, harvest seasons, and rituals tied to Tlaloc and Totec. In the Chinampa world, their authority wasn't merely spiritual, it carried civic weight. A priest's nod could validate a garden's condition. A frown could send a farmer into 3 days of frantic straightening. One priest raises a hand in greeting as the group approaches a Chinampa corner. You step aside as the procession begins a slow circuit along the boundary, their sandals barely whispering against the packed soil. The torches illuminate their steady movements. No rush, no hesitation, simply ritual precision. Your guide whispers, "They check the lines first." Sure enough, one priest kneels and studies the Chinampa's perimeter. The woven reed edge, the straightness of the corners, the smoothness of the mud wall. He touches the surface lightly, as though greeting an old friend. "Aligned," he says softly, and the nearest farmer exhales with relief you didn't realize she'd been holding. Next, the priests walk the rows. Their eyes are sharp but warm, scanning for signs of imbalance. Overcrowded plants, wilting stems, water pooling where it shouldn't. Their presence isn't intimidating, more like an expert gardener visiting your backyard but with cosmic authority and absolutely no tolerance for sloppiness. A fringe tidbit emerges when your guide points to one priest carrying a bowl of shimmering powder. "Some say this powder was once made with crushed crystals and flower ash," he whispers. "Believed to help the gardens remember their shape." Historians still argue whether this was symbolic or if the minerals actually benefited the soil. The priest sprinkles a thin, perfect trail of the powder between two rows. You half expect the plants to sit up straighter out of respect. A young farmer stands nervously nearby, wringing her hands. Her Chinampa corner is due for inspection. You offer her a supportive nod. She nods back like someone about to take an exam graded by ancient forces. The priest kneels, touches the soil, studies the flow of irrigation, and lifts a single bean leaf between his fingers. After a moment, he smiles gently. "Healthy," he announces. Her shoulders drop. She beams. You resist the urge to applaud. The procession moves on, chanting softly, low, melodic tones that blend with the sound of water lapping against the Chinampa walls. The chant is comforting, repetitive, peaceful. Even the willows seem to lean closer. You catch fragments of their words: gratitude for balance, acknowledgement of the lake's gift, small jokes woven into the rhythm like warm stitches. At one point, a priest mutters something about that one Chinampa that always tries to flood itself, and the others laugh quietly. Apparently, even sacred inspections include inside jokes. Your guide nudges you toward a small shrine built at the end of a row, an altar made of stone, adorned with petals, maize kernels, and little carved figurines. A priest approaches it now, lighting a small incense bundle. The smoke spirals upward, glowing orange and white in the torchlight. "This is where the gardens receive their good behavior reminder," your guide says. You arch an eyebrow. "A reminder?" He grins. "Everything in this place listens. Even the soil." The priest murmurs a blessing over the shrine, words smooth as river stones. The farmers bow slightly. Even you feel compelled to take a step back in respect. The scent of incense mixes with the cool night air, softening everything around you. As you walk with the procession, you realize something subtle. The priests aren't hunting for mistakes. They're reaffirming the harmony of the land. Their presence reinforces not fear, but pride. Accountability with gentleness. Order with meaning. One priest approaches a patch of amaranth and gestures for you to come closer. You obey, feeling like you've just been summoned by a guidance counselor of the cosmos. He lifts an amaranth leaf and holds it to the torchlight. "You see the edges?" he asks. You nod, even though you have absolutely no idea what you're looking for. He smiles patiently. Clean edges mean insects respect the boundary. Clean soil means the roots breathe. Clean air means the water carries the right memories. You blink. Memories? He gestures to the canal. Water remembers the paths we guide it through. Mud remembers the shape we give it. Plants remember the care we offer. He pats your shoulder. Neatness is not a condition. It is a conversation. You stand there, slightly stunned, reassessing every houseplant you've ever owned. The priests continue through the Chinampa labyrinth. At one point, they pause at a Chinampa whose rows are slightly askew. Not disastrously so, but enough to catch a trained eye. The supervising priest studies the angle, then gently calls the farmer over. Together, they straighten one section, reinforcing the edge with new reeds. No scolding, no shame, just correction through shared action. The farmer bows deeply. The priest bows back. The gesture is mutual respect, not hierarchy. A small moment near the end makes you smile. The dog from the night patrol joins the procession, tail wagging. The priests pause to pet him. One jokingly places a marigold behind his ear. The dog accepts this with the dignity of a creature who already knows he's important. Your guide says, even the guardians need blessings. As the inspection concludes, the priests gather on a central Chinampa and raise their incense bowls. The smoke curls upward, drifting across the water like thin silver threads weaving the land and sky together. Their voices rise, soft but resonant. Words of gratitude. Words of continuity. Words that feel like the garden's version of a lullaby. The farmers bow. The torches dim. The night hushes again. Your guide leans close. The gardens stay neat, he says, because we tend them with our hands. But they stay balanced because someone reminds us why it matters. You look out over the Chinampas, rose glimmering in moonlight, willows breathing gently, canals smooth as obsidian mirrors, and you understand. Neatness here isn't just visual. It's spiritual. A shared ritual of care, order, and quiet devotion. And tonight, under the glow of sacred smoke and moonlit water, the Chinampas look more perfect than ever. The next morning unfurls in soft layers of silver and peach, painted across the lake like a promise. You stretch your sore muscles you didn't even know existed until the Chinampas politely activated them, and follow your guide toward a meeting that feels different from anything you've seen so far. Less muddy, more serious. The air carries the hum of voices, the rustle of woven cloaks, the low timbre of officials speaking in that particular tone people use when they think they're being reasonable, but are definitely arguing. Today, your guide whispers, you learn the politics of neatness. You blink. Politics? In floating gardens? He gestures to a shaded platform built along a wide canal where representatives from several Kalpuli, neighborhood communities, have gathered. There are farmers with reed hats, priests with painted bands, merchants with embroidered cloaks, and a few stern-faced officials from Tenochtitlan proper. The tension in the air is almost visible, shimmering like heat over stone. A mainstream historical fact. The Chinampas weren't just agricultural marvels, they were economic engines and political leverage points. Control over canals, labor contributions, crop quotas, and market distribution rights shaped alliances and rivalries. Neatness wasn't merely aesthetic, it signaled competency, reliability, and honor. And here, among the gathered representatives, neatness is also ammunition. A merchant rises first. The canals near Xochimilco district, she says crisply, are flowing unevenly again. Some fields are over-irrigated, others under. This affects market supply. Immediately, several farmers turn to look at one particular man. He raises both hands defensively. Our rotary gate works fine, he insists. It's your section that refuses to cooperate. Your guide leans close to you. Translation. Their canal walls slumped after last week's rainstorm, and now everyone is pretending it's someone else's fault. The officials murmur. One priest clears his throat meaningfully. And then comes the accusation delivered with all the seriousness of a courtroom drama. Your Chinampa edges are crooked. Gasps ripple through the crowd. You didn't know geometry insults could hit that hard. The man sputters. Crooked? The willow's bent. That's all. A representative from another Kalpuli calmly unfurls a reed map. Yes, a literal woven map, showing the garden boundaries. And sure enough, a cluster of Chinampas has subtly drifted out of alignment. Only by a foot or two, but here, that might as well be a mile. Your guide murmurs. This is why neatness matters. One sloppy edge, and suddenly 4 neighborhoods are arguing over water rights. As the debate intensifies, a fringe tidbit rises from a soft-spoken elderly woman with a staff decorated in blue pigment. In ancient times, she says, it was believed that crooked Chinampas disrupted cosmic harmony. Tlaloc's reflection on the water would warp, and the rains would become unpredictable. She taps the staff lightly. Historians still argue whether that belief emerged from drought cycles or from one farmer who simply hated uneven lines. The officials nod gravely. You suspect they don't want to risk warping any cosmic reflections today. A young representative steps forward with a calmer tone. We should perform a joint repair, he suggests. Restake the borders. Reinforce the reed walls. Restore alignment. The lake wants us to cooperate. The priest from Section 12's inspection nods approvingly. The tension thaws. Farmers exchange weary but relieved glances. Neatness diplomacy, it seems, is about compromise. Your guide turns to you.
See?
The Chinampas teach politics too. Straight lines make peaceful neighbors. But the meeting isn't over. Now comes the matter of market quotas. Tlatelolco expects certain quantities of produce from each district. One neighborhood harvested less this cycle due to pest pressure, and another produced extra amaranth thanks to especially careful rotation. Redistribution must be negotiated. Tributes must be balanced. A merchant declares, if one Chinampa falters, all must support. Another responds, but if one Chinampa excels, all must honor. You notice there's a subtle dance here, part ritual, part strategy, part community management. The dog from earlier wanders into the meeting and sits directly in the center. Every representative pauses mid-argument to pet him. Politics, it appears, has universal stress relief protocols. As discussions continue, a new topic arises: canal cleanliness schedules. One official suggests that a certain neighborhood hasn't been contributing enough labor. The accused farmer throws up his hands. My son was sick, he protests. Your sons are always sick, someone mutters. They're growing boys. They're grown men. They still catch colds. Your guide whispers, this happens every year. They settle it by assigning him extra sediment dredging. He pretends to complain, but secretly likes the quiet work. Sure enough, moments later, the council agrees on the extra assignment. The farmer grumbles theatrically, but you notice the smile tugging at his mouth. A priest concludes the meeting with a calm, resonant statement. The neatness of the gardens reflects the neatness of our cooperation. Let the water flow evenly, and let our hearts do the same. The officials bow. The reps bow. Even the dog bows or stretches, but it counts. As everyone disperses, your guide leads you back toward the water. The canal looks peaceful, but now you see the invisible networks beneath the surface. Agreements, mutual responsibilities, traditions, quiet rivalries, and shared pride. The Chinampas stay neat, your guide says, because neatness is a contract. Between neighbors, between districts, between people and lake, between present and past. You look across the floating gardens, symmetrical, serene, shimmering beneath the mid-morning sun. Political harmony, hydrological precision, spiritual order, and communal discipline woven into every straight line. And you realize, neatness here isn't just maintenance. It's governance. It's cooperation. It's identity. The morning after the council meeting arrives with an uneasy stillness, the kind of stillness that feels like the world is holding its breath. The air hangs thick, heavy, humid. Even the willows seem tense, their leaves pointing downward as though bracing for something. Your guide squints at the horizon. Storm season, he says. The time when the Chinampas prove whether they're truly neat or just pretending. You swallow. You did not realize neatness had a survival test. But oh, it does, and nature administers it ruthlessly. Clouds gather in bruised layers over Lake Texcoco, deep purples and grays swirling like spilled ink. You hear thunder rumble in the distance, rolling slowly across the water. Birds dart low, uneasy. The dog from previous nights curls beneath a canoe, whimpering softly. Your guide hands you a coil of reed rope and a wooden stake. Today we tie down the world, he says with a wry smile. A mainstream historical fact, storms on Lake Texcoco could be fierce. Strong winds threatened to erode Chinampa edges, uproot young willows, tear crops from their rows, and push entire floating islands into misalignment. After every storm, massive repair efforts were required to restore the grid. You rush with him to a Chinampa edge where other farmers are already reinforcing the boundaries. They weave fresh reeds into the perimeter walls, tightening the structure, checking for weakness. Every corner must be crisp. Every stake must be firm. The straight lines must hold. Then, crack. A bolt of lightning splits the sky, white-hot and jagged. The wind rises suddenly, sweeping across the water with a sharp hiss. The storm hits. Rain slams the lake so hard it looks like boiling silver. Lightning flashes again, illuminating dozens of farmers running, tying, bracing, shouting instructions over the roar. Stake the west side. Pull the gate close. Secure that willow. Where is the dog? The dog is fine. He is under a canoe again. Your guide grabs your arm and points. Help there. You join a team tightening the woven edges of a Chinampa that's beginning to shift ever so slightly, just an inch, but here an inch is the first step toward chaos. The mud wall trembles under the assault of wind and waves. You drive a stake deeper, your feet slipping in the soaked earth. A woman next to you helps brace it, grunting with the strength of someone who has done this countless times. The storm intensifies. The air tastes like electricity. The sky flickers nonstop, transforming the Chinampas into a surreal grid of black silhouettes on silver flashes. A fringed tidbit surfaces in the chaos when an older farmer shouts over the wind, "My grandfather said storms come to see if the Chinampas still respect the lake." He laughs wildly, hair plastered to his face. Historians still argue whether that was metaphor or just his way of justifying why he hid inside during storms. You cling to the reed wall, heart pounding. Water surges into the canal. A section of woven edge snaps loose, flapping dangerously. Two farmers rush forward to patch it, their hands moving with frantic precision. Your guide calls to you, "Follow me." You sprint after him, more sliding than running, toward a Chinampa where a young willow is leaning at a precarious angle. Its roots are strong, but the wind is stronger. "Hold it," a woman yells. You press your weight against the trunk as she binds it with rope. The willow groans like a living creature caught between worlds. Rain drenches you, dripping down your face, but the tree slowly straightens as the rope tightens. You feel the Chinampa stabilize beneath your feet, shifting back into alignment. You breathe again. But the storm isn't done. A wave smashes into another Chinampa's edge, tearing a chunk of mud free. Farmers rush to patch it with emergency reed mats, pressing them into place and securing them with stakes. "Quick," your guide shouts, before the water reshapes it. Reshape it? You look at the water, furious, churning alive.
Yes.
It absolutely wants to remodel the garden. Everyone works until their muscles shake. The storm rages for what feels like hours, though time dissolves in the downpour. The sky blazes with lightning. Rain slashes sideways. Wind attempts to lift your hair from your skull. Every drop of water feels personal. Finally, slowly, the thunder begins to fade. The wind lessens. The rain softens into a whisper. The storm withdraws. What remains is the sound of breathing. Dozens of farmers breathing hard, shoulders slumped, drenched clothes clinging like second skins. Your guide pushes his wet hair back and surveys the scene. "Now," he says with a weary smile, "we fix everything." You laugh because he must be joking. He is not. Post-storm repairs begin immediately. The water is still choppy, but calm enough to reveal damage: shifted stakes, sagging walls, crooked rows, waterlogged patches. The storm tested everything, and the people now restore everything. You join a team reinforcing a Chinampa corner that washed thin. They lay fresh layers of mud, reeds, and sediment with the same precision as the day the island was born. Another group restraightens rows by smoothing the soil and brushing it back into alignment. The dog trots along the edges like a supervisor doing morale checks. A child points at a slight curve in a Chinampa wall and gasps dramatically. The storm made it bend. A farmer pats his head. Then we bend it back. As the sun pierces the clouds, golden light spreads across the lake like a blessing. Steam rises from the soaked earth. The Chinampas glisten. Reflections sharpen. Neatness returns. Bit by bit, the grid restores itself, as if the lake never dared challenge its form. Your guide wraps an arm around your shoulders. Storms always come, he says. But neatness isn't about avoiding trouble. It's about rebuilding beautifully. You look out over the Chinampas, straight lines restored, walls reformed, willows newly braced, and you realize the Aztecs didn't keep their floating gardens neat by accident. They kept them neat by persistence,
Discipline.
resilience, and the unshakable belief that order can be reclaimed from chaos. And today, after the storm's challenge, the Chinampas shine with a renewed, battle-tested perfection. The day after the storm feels like the lake has paused to breathe. A soft mist hovers above the water, thin enough to let the sun gleam through but thick enough to blur the distant willows into watercolor strokes. Everything glistens, every reed, every leaf, every mud-packed edge, and your guide walks with the slow, satisfied gait of someone who has survived something important and now intends to appreciate every inch of restored order. Tonight, he says, we reach the last light of the canals, the finishing touches of the year. You follow him along a Chinampa row so perfectly reconstructed that you almost forget the storm ever happened. The willows stand tall again, their ropes taut, their leaves whispering approval. The reed walls are crisp. The rows are combed smooth. Even the water seems to glide in straighter lines. Farmers gather quietly for the day's final tending, not heavy work now, but careful, deliberate checking. A man touches each willow trunk, feeling for looseness. A woman smooths a ridge of soil with delicate sweeps of her palm. Children collect stray leaves that floated in after the storm. All these tiny gestures stitch the final seams of the Chinampa year. A mainstream historical factor guide shares, Chinampa cycles followed seasonal rhythms, with certain periods devoted to renewal and preparation rather than planting or harvest. After storm season, farmers often performed inspections, minor repairs, and soil refreshing to ensure the gardens entered the next agricultural cycle strong and orderly. But today is more than maintenance. It's ritual closure. As you walk, an elderly woman hands you a small reed brush, the same kind used earlier for polishing produce. For brushing the earth, she says. So it remembers it is loved. You kneel at a row of young amaranth and brush the soil lightly. It leaves faint lines, smooth and parallel. The Chinampa seems to sigh beneath your touch. Nearby, a group of farmers prepares the year's final flower bundles. They tie marigolds with thin reeds, creating neat clusters that will be floated down the central canal at dusk. For the lake, your guide explains, a thank you offering. Without her, none of this exists. One child runs up to you, holding a bright flower. Here, he says, so you don't feel left out. You tuck it behind your ear. The child beams like he has accomplished a great diplomacy mission. The sun dips low, so low the canals glow with warm copper light. Canoes assemble loosely in a line, each carrying a small pile of marigold bundles. Farmers paddle slowly, creating a procession that feels sacred and familiar. No shouting, no hurry, just quiet movement and quiet pride. A fringe tidbit surfaces when your guide mentions that in older times, some believed these marigolds helped guide wandering lake spirits back to their homes. He lifts an eyebrow. Historians still argue whether that was symbolic or literal navigation, but either way, flowers make good offerings. You sit at the edge of a Chinampa as the procession passes. Someone hands you a single bundle. You place it on the water. It floats gently, spinning once before falling into line with the others. The current carries them like glowing lanterns. Your guide settles beside you, elbows on his knees. The neatness of these gardens, he says softly, is not just work. It is memory. Generations built these lines. Generations kept them. And every year, at last light, we honor that. Shadows stretch across the water. The final marigolds drift by. The sky deepens into a perfect mirror of the canals, stripes of violet and rose, rippling at the edges where willows lean in. The farmers gather for one last look. Their faces are calm, illuminated by the last threads of day. They stand together in a quiet semicircle, a living frame around the floating gardens they shaped, defended, cleaned, argued over, repaired, and loved. Your guide rests a hand on your shoulder. Now you see it. The secret. The real reason the Chinampas stay neat. You wait, listening to the faint rustle of reeds, the soft lap of water, the distant hum of night insects awakening. He smiles. They stay neat because we never stop tending them, not with our hands, not with our work, and not with our hearts. And as the sun melts behind the horizon, the Chinampas glow in a final burst of color. Gold on green, silver on water, straight rows turning to silhouettes before night gently takes their place. The year closes in quiet perfection. And now, as darkness settles fully over Lake Texcoco, let everything soften. Let the neat lines of the Chinampas fade into gentle shadows. Let the water slow, its whispers sinking into the deeper quiet beneath the surface. You watch the last marigold float downstream, its small golden face drifting lazily, peacefully, until it becomes just a spark, and then nothing at all. The air cools, drawing a delicate breeze through the willow leaves. Their rustling becomes a lullaby, steady, low, cradling the night in long, slow breaths. The torches on distant Chinampas shimmer once, twice, then dim into warm orange glows like sleepy eyes closing. You feel the day's stories settling around you, not heavy, but soft, like blankets folded at the foot of a bed. All that labor, all that tending, all that careful shaping of earth and water, now dissolves into calm. The farmers have gone home. The tools rest quietly. The canals drift without purpose except to dream. You breathe deeply, letting your shoulders fall, letting your mind loosen from the tight lines of the day. Everything slows. The lake drifts. The air hums. Your pulse sinks with the quiet rhythm of the floating gardens. Nothing left to fix. Nothing left to watch. Nothing left to remember or redo. Just the cool, dark stillness of a world that has earned its rest and wants you to rest with it. So, let the water rock gently beneath your thoughts. Let the willows stand guard over your sleep. Let the Chinampas, perfectly neat and perfectly calm now, carry you into dreams as lightly as a flower floating on the canal. Sweet dreams.